Hey everyone, welcome back to the Old World with Will Tanner. Today, I'm really excited to have on an author whose work I discovered thanks to my friend Rory Duncan, who hopefully most of y'all have listened to our past episodes about his life growing up in Rhodesia and then Zambia and South Africa. And the author who's speaking to us today is Alice Henningway, who wrote a fabulous book called Nyika. I think I pronounced that correctly. I love you, which is it's a lot of fun. It's sad too, but it's a really good read. And so I've heard it's been optioned for a film out in LA, which will be really cool if that comes to pass. As I believe Don't Let's Go to the Dogs Tonight by Alex Fuller was also turned into a movie, if I remember that correctly too, which is another fabulous book. But we're going to be talking about Nika, I Love You today. So, Alice, could you introduce yourself and introduce your background to people who might not have read your book or might not know you yet?
Hi. First of all, thank you so much for having me on the show, and I am very grateful for that. And my background is I grew up in Zim, and I was born during the Bush War, and my background became conservation on the Save Valley Conservancy, which was initially a cattle ranch, and then my dad and Ian Delarue and other gentlemen then went ahead and changed it into a conservation, and now it is world famous, Save Valley Conservancy. It's 800,000 hectares, so it was a big playground for me. So I had an incredibly amazing childhood.
Wow. So for those listening, we're going to begin with the Bush War and growing up in Rhodesia, and then from there get into the Save Valley Conservancy and what life was like after the war and with Zimbabwe and all of that, which is a sad story, but also one that's, I think, very interesting and worth remembering. So to begin, what was life like growing up on a farm in Rhodesia, particularly during the Bush War? And did life change as the war went on? Whatever you find interesting that you might want to share with people.
I think when you're a child, um, everything is sort of new to you, right? And you're not politically minded yet. So growing up on the farm in that particular time was really a little bit scary, actually, because our house was on a hill. So we were a target that you couldn't really miss.
Mhm.
But then also all the people that worked with us. My father never ever said people worked for us, they worked with us. They were all caught up in it as well. So both parties always got hurt. And as a child, you witness that hurt and that pain. And in fact, Nika saved my life during this time. And it was the final decision for my dad to move from Ingwani Ranch to the Conservancy was because I was playing on my swing outside and the opposition opened fire and I was their direct target. They had written a letter as a warning that there would be another warning, and that actually was me. And I was playing on my swing and opened upon with AK-47 fire. And Nika ran to me and um, covered my body with her body to save my life. So I think that bonded us from a very young age because I couldn't understand why what I had done. There's like I
Mhm.
didn't understand what was happening.
And to follow up on that, what part of the country was your farm in? What did y'all grow? One thing to think about that as well, in the book, you reference the village with the tribal chief who was nearby. What was that situation like? And was it a village that was near your farm, or were y'all abutting tribal trust land? I know that's a lot of questions, but
No, no, no. It was in the tribal trust land, and every farm has a compound, and sometimes there are extra houses built in a compound along with the traditional houses. And that's where all the people that work alongside you live. And so it's very close to the house. I mean, our compound was only about 2 kilometers from the house down a hill. I spent a lot of time there with Nika. I learned all the Shona traditions. I learned songs. I learned about the djembe drums. I learned Africa from both sides of the coin. And that was pretty brilliant. And I'm grateful for that. And what was the other question? What was,
Oh, what did y'all grow, and what part of the country was your
oh,
farm?
okay, we were actually very close to Mozambique, and
Okay.
we were right on the front line, right,
Mhm.
like directly where the war was the worst. It
Mhm.
was the hot seat, and I was actually invited to London to read at a journalist club called the Frontline, specifically because of where this story initially came from. So it was the hot seat of the war. I mean, we got attacked frequently. Huh? It was terrible.
Wow. Related to that, when most people, at least in America, think of Africa, we think of the megafauna and the wildlife. You mentioned a few run-ins with, I think it was crocodiles and hippopotami. One of the dams, it might have, was it Lake Kariba? Now I can't remember, but
I don't know, but they have crocodiles too. Apparently, Lake Kariba has one crocodile per meter of the perimeter of the lake. That's what people say. I
oh,
don't know if it's true or like, those little town stories.
mhm.
The Dutch actually have a nice word for it. They call it broodje aap. I'm not too sure. But I don't understand this because all the farmers, they had boats
Mhm.
and not big boats, but some had speedboats. And my dad insisted, really, he insisted that we learn to water ski. And the lake was full of crocodiles and hippos. I mean, I can't, I have children and there's not a chance in hell I would ever even comprehend to think to teach them how to water ski. And like, I mean, I was charged by a hippo, Nyika and I, you know, just going to the toilet, and we just came around the corner at the wrong time, and this hippo had her calf next to her, and of course, they're very, very, very extremely protective of the young. In fact, they cause more deaths in Africa, I think, than any other animal besides the buffalo to humans. I mean,
Mhm.
and
Right.
that was pretty scary because I actually felt like a rag doll. I was like, this thing is huge. And Nika was dragging me, and then she flung me on her back and then was running. And then we scaled an anthill, and then we were in the tree. And then my grandmother, in all her glory, she was quite a woman, shot the shotgun into the sky, and the, the hippo stopped running.
I would recommend everyone buy the book for various reasons, but if only for the story of the trip to the lake with the water skiing with the hippopotamus, and then that story with the hippopotamus. I was sitting on the couch, my wife was looking at me, and my jaw was just agape as I was reading just story after story about this disaster of a lake trip. That was really fascinating. The
Yeah.
final kind of introductory question before we get into some of the other ones I'd sent you over. Could you describe your family background and how they ended up in Rhodesia, Zimbabwe? Because most of Americans think of Rhodesia more as English populated and English colony, but from what I understood at the beginning of the book, your family was primarily Dutch. So could you just describe how they ended up there? And um,
Yeah. They left Germany actually before the Second World War from a little town called Lipstadt, and they moved to Namibia. Unfortunately, that was like quite serious stuff went down in Namibia, and then they moved from Namibia to South Africa and worked for the Dutch East India Company. And my then, so I'm 8 generations African.
wow.
I have Indian blood. I have Filipino blood. I have Bantu blood. I have Cameroonian blood. I have predominantly German blood.
Okay.
And I have some Scottish blood. So, so
Wow.
I'm a really mongrel. I'm a mixed, yeah, completely.
The
And it's not, it is a lot. There were a lot of Germans and a lot of French and Italians and everything that moved up from South Africa into um, it was north and south. It was like that, and then
Mhm.
then it became Rhodesia, and they moved up. into Rhodesia and stayed in Zimbabwe, but there was many more cultures. It's just that it was a British colony, so everybody thought it was predominantly British, but there was really a lot of different mixed cultures as well.
It's very interesting. And that
Mm.
leads into the kind of the next big question I had, which was, could you tell us about the culture of Rhodesia as you grew up? Because I look from the outside looking in, that's one of the more fascinating aspects of the colony is just the, and this is something I spoke about with Rory as well, just the very unique atmosphere it seems to have had and the kind of pleasant combination of African frontier type life with English life, and I don't know. It's just it's really fascinating to look at and read about. So, could you describe what it was like, both on the farm and then later in Nyika, you get into the country club. I forget the name, but the club and the club scene and club life. Sorry, I know that's a long and broad question,
No,
but
no,
whatever
no.
you find interesting about it.
It was a life of really extremes. That is the you could 1 minute be having, and my parents were very strict about manners at the table. So we had to come dressed to the table and eat properly at the table. And then the next thing there was bullets flying and you were crawling, leopard crawling down to the bathroom to like save your life, you know? So there was that, and that's like extreme, right? And
Hmm.
then I think war is a catalyst for extremism in any like promiscuity, that whole white mischief film. I'm sure you've
Right.
read it, yeah, or seen it. But the Uncasine Country Club was quite something. I mean, everybody was really, really serious about their golf and their tennis and their squash and their bowls and their like, yeah, and then movie night as well, where all the kids were meant to be sleeping in the car, but I always crept out the car and I went to watch the movie that was showing because we only got to see the cartoon and then we were sent to sleep in the car with help, but
Hmm.
I didn't have any help. So I had my mom and dad just showed me where the gun was in the glove compartment and said, "If there's any problems, you know where it is." I was like 7. You know, it was I
Hmm.
mean, we were also trained pretty young
Right.
to know about these things to save yourself if you need it, but I had big brothers and sisters, so they would obviously look after me, you know, so I was the youngest of 5. I lost my brother in the war.
Mm.
So, you know, there's 4 of us still, so that's quite neat. But it was like the country life was interesting. It was a very, yeah, you had croquet and high tea was very it was bizarre, really.
It was that point you made about extremes is a great one. I was thinking about that when reading the book because you described the country club where it's all these people focused on their golf and their tennis, and then the clubhouse is surrounded by trenches in case it's
Yeah,
attacked. Which, yeah,
yeah, and obviously what us kids saw in the trenches was not always rats, you know, I think I say that too.
you do. Yes.
Yeah, but we played in those trenches like army and soldier games and being kidnapped and, you know, all that kind of stuff, and, then every year also the adults my dad was putting on shows and everything. He also opened the first theater in this part of the world, in a place called Triangle, which is not too far away, is where we went eventually all to school and Shredsy, this area. And he used to put on plays and shows, and the French can, of course, made its way down there. Can you imagine?
There was a funny picture of that in the book that I was
Yeah.
chuckling at when I made it to that part.
I remember watching my mother dance the can, thinking, wow, you know, this is pretty neat. Yeah.
Related to that, there are other stories in the book about the, kind of what you mentioned with having to get dressed up to go to dinner with your family. The very proper nature of society mixed with the, I guess, kind of a frontier or developing environment. I was thinking of that in the story about, I think it's when you were working in your grandmother's shop or your grandfather's shop, and there's, like, the very, attractive uniforms, and it has this very civilized air that reminded me of, like, London before London degenerated somewhat. But then mixed with that, you're, well, in the middle of Africa, and there's a war going on and, all this craziness. Could you describe, either any fun stories about that or just kind of the general atmosphere and that unique mixture in life?
Well, my grandmother was a powerhouse. She actually reminded me of a New Yorker. Smoked like a chimney. She didn't pass from smoking. And she never sat down. I didn't remember her sitting down ever. And it was called Palm Court, the restaurant. And my uncle was Greek, and he had a gambling thing in the back of the restaurant where they gambled and they bet on horses and all sorts of things. And it was really nice to go in there and watch them with the smell of cigar smoke and the swinging lamp and the whiskey. It was really pretty awesome to be allowed
Mhm.
in. And that's where the name of the town I gave it. It was called Fort Vic. Then it was called Masvingo, but I called it Mas Vegas because of
Right.
this thing. And the restaurant became the center point for like everybody in town, because a lot of the soldiers sent their letters there. So the women came to pick up their post, and my grandmother said, it's not nice to get bad news alone. So, and good news was shared, of course, but
Mhm.
of course, sometimes there was bad news, and therefore there were women all around to support the other women, um, when they got this news. But it was always a buzz, and it was always alive, and there was always prawns coming in from Mozambique, and then the whole town would know about there was prawns, and then it would descend on this cafe. And yeah, it was like, and I mean, in Zimbabwe we have very interesting names like blessing and patience and telephone and beauty and all sorts of name wine.
Mhm.
And these were the names of the waiters in the restaurant and stuff. So it was a lot bizarre actually. When you talk about it to people from
Mhm.
the West, they're like, "What is the name? What? I beg your pardon? Telephone?" I'm like, "Yeah, yeah." And
One other point on culture, and this is something I've heard from, pretty much everyone I've met who visited Rhodesia and was coming in from America and surprised, was the very heavy drinking culture, particularly of gin, and then kinda related to that, what you mentioned with horse races, both with horse races and polo and horses generally, kind of the equestrian life as one imagines it, with the drinking and horse races and polo and all that. It First off, I guess, is that correct? Was there a pretty heavy drinking culture? And then 2, do you, and I don't even mean that negatively, I'm just
no, no,
curious.
no, no, no.
And then, what was kind of that aspect of life like, if it did exist or you did run into it?
I think that, um, if you've been through anything traumatic, drinking can be something that you do, and when you're in it, I think it can escalate. Um, yeah, there was a lot of drinking, a lot, but it was also pretty much happiness.
Mhm.
It wasn't so out of control that it became ugly too much, right?
Right.
My mom didn't drink at all, really. My mother was the epitome of a lady, and I have a very good relationship with her. Um, yeah, there is this whole polo equestrian thing, but there's also polo cross. My brother played polo cross. We had 17 horses.
Hmm.
And I also was horse riding, but not anything like dressage, or I preferred just riding. My
Mhm.
dad was an avid horse rider. And when I asked him, I said to him, "What was your biggest accomplishment in your life?" I interviewed him. And he said, I thought he was going to say the Conservancy, being the head of the Cotton Growers Association in Zimbabwe, or something. But he said it was getting 200 head of cattle over the Save River during its flooding season with his horse Blaze alone and his Ridgeback dog, um, and not one cow or one heifer was taken by a crocodile. That was his biggest accomplishment. He said that was his biggest personal accomplishment. So
It's
horse riding is in the family. Yes.
Yeah, that was a really cool story in the book. I think you included it towards the end, and it was quite nice.
Yeah.
It reminded me of in Ron Morkel's book about Rhodesia. He
Mhm.
mentions his grandfather had a gold mine back when the colony was first started, and he needed to get back to South Africa to pay a bill or something. And he had these heavy bags of gold around his neck and the horse's neck, and the river was flooded, and there were crocodiles, and he had to figure out a way to get across it. Yeah, I was just chuckling that the the flooded river and the horses and everything it came up.
It really was like the Wild West made wilder
Mhm.
because, I mean, you had also, in this region where the gold and everything was, you had a very serious amount of leopard,
Oh,
a
didn't
very
know that.
serious amount of leopard. So, like, all the car tracks and the roads that were made and everything, the biggest danger was being killed by leopard, actually.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, I mean, that was super serious. That was like, mm, you know?
Yeah, it's yeesh. Moving on from there, did life change much, for you and your family in 1980 when the former government departed and Mugabe became leader? How did life change, if at all, in the, decade that followed or the period that followed that you were still there?
Um, I mean, it was a gradual change. It wasn't
Okay.
overnight, right? And it's a really tough question because I was so far removed from society that I was on the conservation with my father, concentrating on the biggest elephant translocation that has ever taken place in the world. So we moved 564 elephants 900 kilometers.
Wow.
And this was during this was my first lesson in logistics. And the lady that got all the funding was Penny Havner, and the man who organized it who actually did the physical work was a guy called Clem Coetzee. And then enabling, of course, my dad's vision, Ian Delarue's vision, Mr. Whittle's vision. Like it's it was so intense because then I also got 4 baby elephants to look after and nurture and raise, with my elder brother and I. When I went to school,
Mhm.
he helped. He did the majority of it, but I fell in love with one, which he called and I called Tiny. There was nothing tiny about it, but it was we had to they all survived. No elephant died, and now there are lots of elephants on the Conservancy. So I was, like I said in the very beginning of this interview, I live in my own head, and sometimes that's a curse, and sometimes it's opposite, you know,
Mhm.
type
Right.
thing. But and I focus my focus with this book is also the charity that goes with charity. It's not charity. It's helping build extra classrooms onto an existing school because I believe that with right education, anything is possible and mistakes can be avoided.
Yeah. Could you, tell us more about the Save Valley Conservancy while we're on the, subject? You can just, talk about it now, because that's
I
a
mean, I
I'd love
do
to hear more
love
about
it.
it. Mhm.
I love it there. For me, I know people say you come from Zimbabwe, Alison, but in my mind, I come from the Save Valley Conservancy, which is on Zimbabwe. It's a little bit like, for me, Berlin seems to be its own country, even though it's in Germany. It's so individual, Berlin,
Mhm.
and also the Conservancy is so unique and beautiful, and like we a lot of now we're creating jobs for women from the community surrounding the community because that's where conservation is going. It's going to be community led, and so if everybody gets involved, everybody then has understanding, and the women don't have to just make the beds and in on the safari places and stuff
Mhm.
like that. They are right now getting fully educated and to be rangers and stuff. So, and Save the Rhino is project on the Conservancy is going great. And I mean, it's just going strength to strength to strength. And my father has passed now. And now I'm returning to Zimbabwe for the first time in a very, very long time because I wanted um, my second book to be ready before I leave. And it'll be the first time I see my dad's grave since he passed away, which is
Wow.
like nearly 10 years ago.
Wow. Um,
So it's going to be very emotional. And he would be, I'm sure he's very proud of what he accomplished with the Save Valley Conservancy, him and Ian Delarue.
I'd like to get into that more. Could you describe how it went from being a ranch to being a conservancy, and then I guess maybe the initial idea for why it was established or what animals were initially intended to be protected, and how that's changed over time, if not.
Nowadays they use the word sustainable.
Hmm.
They didn't have that word before. And we just had a man, Ian Delarue, when a lot of people were taking their money out the country, he decided to reinvest in the country for Zimbabwe's youth and Rhodesia's youth, the kids, because
Hmm.
he was so passionate about this with my dad. And so he reinvested his entire fortune back into the Save Valley Conservancy. And it was all cattle ranches. And this is what is also interesting for you. Alexander Fuller,
Hmm.
my dad hired her dad to help move the
Wow.
cattle off the ranch to go to other cattle farms and cold storage. And Alexander Fuller lived in one of the houses on the Conservancy with her parents and her sister.
Oh, wow.
So I didn't never know her. I've never
Mhm.
met her. Um, I love her work. Yes, I really do respect and love her books. Yes. So that's a little bit interesting for you. So it went from a
That
cattle
is interesting.
ranch and then all 10 farms or cattle ranches
Mhm.
decided to join together and take down all the fences. And then all the species that were originally there were reintroduced, the ones that weren't there. I think there were 14 species that were reintroduced. And now it's it's way more sustainable, right? Because it's nature.
Mhm.
And therefore, the Conservancy, what I like the most is that the animal comes first and the human being comes second. I know that might sound weird, but that's how I feel.
I'm in America, one thing that interests me is the, sustainable ranching movement with, like, grass-fed and finished beef and trying to make that, preserve the topsoil, and one of the key figures in that is Alan Savory, who, from what I remember,
Yes.
were
Yes.
you all involved with him? Because from what I remember, some of his early research involved elephants and using elephant herds to, protect the land, protect the soil, make it sustainable, and avoid soil erosion. Long question again, but were you all at all involved with him?
No, unfortunately, I wasn't. I only saw his work online after I left. But I mean, I think his daughter Sarah is doing a lot of it now, and I reached out to say to people that I'm coming to her Harare to read in December, and I'll be actually reading on the Conservancy. There's a big event, and visiting the school there, Takunda School, to like bridge this thing. It's also supported by the Save Valley Conservancy. It's really important, and her brother reached out to me and said, "Get hold of my sister." So, I mean, these things are inevitable that we'll probably end up meeting.
Oh, that's
But I
cool.
do really respect and admire what he does, and it's great that you know who he is. I really that's super cool.
He's we don't need to get into it, but he's just a fascinating guy, and,
Yes,
he really
yes,
kickstarted all of that with the current
yes.
trends in ranching.
Yeah,
The
he's amazing. I mean, he's done wonderful things, and like I said, I only respect him. And
Mhm.
there's a lot of people doing amazing things in Zim when it comes to sustainability, and now all these new energy efficient products and things that are happening. I think it's amazing.
And related to, I guess, elephants, you mentioned the transplanting of a great number of them to the Conservancy. Could you describe, I guess, what species y'all are trying to protect there and how that's going? I know you've mentioned elephants, and then I think you hinted at rhinos. You might be trying to work with them there, but I know
Yeah.
nothing about it. Could you just describe, what's going on with that and the status of
Um,
protecting those species in Zimbabwe,
okay. Well, I can only, I'm
as
not
far as you know?
involved directly with the
Right.
Conservancy anymore, but I am, like I said, reading down in December. But if you go to their website, they have all the rhino survival, but it's really big because the Conservancy was one of the first places to start saving the rhino, right?
Interesting.
So there was a man called Bryce that I met the last time I was there that wasn't there when I left. And I think they have a whole, like, literally like a army
Mhm.
protecting these animals, right? But I think that's getting smaller thanks to technology, because now there's technology where you can see what's happening on the Conservancy, and where the lights up, those poachers and stuff are there. So there's a whole lot of technology going into conservation, which was never there before. So
Mhm.
that is, I think, very interesting. And also the wild dog.
Oh,
That is also an amazing species that Lynn Barry, she's been predominant in saving this species through her painting. She sells paintings of all these wild dogs, and she has raised a fortune to save this species, and she's really done an exceptional job for for the wild dog on the Conservancy. Um, I think my favorite animal is an elephant. There is a
mhm.
lot of, like, talk about, yeah, if the elephant were rushing through Bordeaux country, they wouldn't think twice about culling them. But they're not in Bordeaux country. They're in Africa where they're from. And I'm not, um, they eat a lot and they knock down a lot of trees. But I think there's other ways, I think, to not cull. I'm against culling. I'm against hunting. I don't see the point.
Mhm.
Yeah.
When you were, younger on the ranch or on the Conservancy, were there any fun stories or interesting stories, from that, kinda like with the hippopotamus that you'd wanna share?
Oh boy, they are so. Oh yeah. Um, Elephants can get drunk. So can baboons.
Hmm.
They all both go to the baobab tree. I don't know if you know the baobab tree.
Is that the
It,
very large one? Or,
yeah,
did they get really big?
yeah, yes, and they're only
Right.
found in southern Africa, like from the
Yes.
equator down. And so you have the marula tree and the baobab tree. Baobab tree produces crematata. It ferments. The baboon and the elephant eat this, and they also eat the other marulas, the fruit that is, and they get really drunk. And then they act so hilarious, really, really, really funny. They're so funny because they sway around the place. The baboons are hilarious. They're like out of off the planet. And growing up, I was fortunate enough to have a wild pig. Um, that came to me because my dad, unfortunately, drove into them, and the mom and two passed away, and there was one little one left. And he grew up thinking he was a dog, right? So he was huge, and this is really, like, confirmed for me how amazingly animals can communicate with you. And the wild pig, just disappeared one day after years, and I was completely devastated. And then one afternoon around 4 o'clock, we were having tea and playing croquet, and Pig, I call them Pig. I give my animals very simple names. They arrive on a Tuesday, it's called Tuesday. Pig is called
Mhm.
Pig. And it walked up the driveway, and behind it was his new partner and three piglets.
Hmm.
So he came just to show us, and of course you can't go to him to touch him because then your scent is back on him again, and he'll be rejected by nature.
Right.
And I just thought that was profound, actually. That moment was profound. He let the dogs, like, they played around and everything, and then he was there for, like, about, I'd say, an hour, just hanging out,
Wow.
and his family were eating the grass. And then he just stayed at head we called Shishakwe, where we lived, it was called headquarters because it was the headquarters of the whole conservancy where everything started. And, it just stayed there close by. So I could see it all the time, and I'd blow kisses to it and say hello, and then it's the same as Tiny the elephant. Tiny stayed in the vicinity around us and, of course, migrated and came back, but they stayed. So did the monkey I had. It just stayed in the vicinity. I mean, it didn't go far away, you know? Just
Wow.
yeah. And we had a night ape. I don't know if you do you know the movie Gremlins?
Yes, actually.
Okay, a night ape, it's called a nakapi or a night ape. It looks exactly like the good gremlin. It's big, right? With a bushy tail.
Uh-huh.
And I was sitting at dinner one night with my family when my dad unbuttoned his shirt and out popped this night ape, and we called him Peepo because he was peeping out of the shirt. And then people grew up and slept here and came everywhere with me, and but used to terrorize the gentleman that cooked at our house. Blessing. He would jump on all the pots that were hanging above the because our kitchen looked quite Italian actually, and it like bang around in the pots and swing on the garlic thing, and also like it was like it was a little bit like a zoo in my house actually. It was a bit like a zoo. Yeah, my mom put her foot down eventually, and she was like, "That's enough. Can't take it. No more animals in the house." So I went to sleep with the elephant in the boma, like outside,
Mhm.
rain and shine.
Kinda I meant to bring this up earlier, but forgot. Could you describe what, relations were like with the villagers with whom your family worked? Because that's a central plot point in the narrative and just kind of is the underlying or a large underlying part of the story. So could you describe what those relations were like during and after the Bush War and, how that worked?
Sure. During the War,
Yes. Yeah, let's start with
they
during.
were solid relationships. They were. I really do think that war is never about what is promoted in the newspapers.
Mhm.
I think war is always about money, and that's just my personal opinion. But, we were close. I mean, we were like family, you understand?
Mhm.
I mean, the the Shona people that worked with us, we I mean, they were always there. They were there through my whole entire life, and I was there through their entire life, and they were magic. They were special. They were kind. And the same goes for what people called the Rhodesians. They were also our relationships were tight. Our
Mhm.
rela they were the rest of the time the war was going on. I mean, there was a lot of people in the war that didn't want to be in the war. They were forced to be in a war, and like as usual. Um, so old men sending young men to do the dirty work, and yeah, we were close, and I mean, I loved Nyika like a second mother,
Mhm.
and when my mom lost my brother, and I think it's the worst thing that can happen to parents if you're a good parent and if it comes naturally to you to lose your child. I think it's there's not, I don't know if there's anything worse. And then Nika lost her son. And
Mhm.
I think that bonded my mom and her pretty much. Like all of these, like I mentioned wine, and I mentioned blessing, and I mentioned Zivarashe, and I mentioned the people in the book.
Mhm.
They stayed with us until they passed, till they died. They had no intention of going anywhere else. And I mean, that was beautiful.
Mhm.
And you don't find that sort of dedication um, in many parts of the world. With such
Right.
reliability and such amazing relationships. And, newspapers did try and sell it the other way around, and they managed to.
It's too bad. Because
Mm.
at least in terms of what made it over to, America with, what I've been reading or people to whom I speak about it, that is a thing that comes up a lot, is that the relationships between the white Rhodesians and black Rhodesians were generally very, very good and lacked a lot of the acrimony and, um, that sort of just bad feeling that you hear about a lot, in Africa, and it was actually a much more positive relationship, which is very, or at least from what I've heard, which is, very interesting and I think very, heartwarming and something from which we could learn. Was that sort of relationship something that survived the war or that continued after, particularly
Yes.
in your experience on the Conservancy?
Yes, it got stronger, actually.
Okay.
Yeah. It stayed, it got stronger. I mean, when the war finished, nobody left. Everybody carried on like usual. Everybody stayed. But we were living super remotely, huh? We were
Mhm.
really remote. And if you're on 800,000 hectares and there's like, what, 40 of you? That is like, it would be stupid not to learn all the ways to survive, right?
Right.
From the people that had been there longer than you. So it's just smart to do that, I think, right?
Mhm.
But I
The
mean, everything was super cool, really.
Yeah. Relatedly, the, kind of final question for now on the Conservancy, and
Mhm.
this relationship, did you, experience anything during the land seizures with the government trying to take the Conservancy away, or was it shielded from that?
I didn't have that experience, and because it's a conservation.
Mhm.
So, my I was surrounded by people in conservation, not farmers.
Got it.
So, conservation was a whole different element
Got it.
to that.
Yes, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then so that leads into a question you said you wanted to talk about, which is what it's like to lose your home, and, how that affects one, which, of course, is quite a sad topic, but worth discussing. So could you, I guess, describe how you lost your home and, uh, just to go with the question, how that affects one?
Um, I actually wrote something down. Do you mind if I read it directly?
Please do.
Okay. To answer that question.
Yes.
Losing your home teaches you that belonging is portable, that you can fold a whole landscape into a language. And Nyika, I love you is that. It's that particular landscape unpacked. So I was homesick for years. I was lucky and very fortunate to fall in love with an amazing man. And I mean, people find it hard to fall in love with someone and have a good relationship anyway, so it was
Mm.
really, really fortunate that was incredible real love. And that helped the homesickness quite a bit. And then we lived in various places from Bangkok to Berlin to the Middle East and so forth. And of course, you see many places. And then during COVID, actually, we were going to travel across the States, but then it was not possible.
Mm.
But we will still do it. And we drove across Spain, and I felt like I was driving in a painting. And I felt that in many ways, I felt it in my heart that this place was so incredibly beautiful and the people were so warm. And I think I really missed that warmth from home. It was I mean, I grew up with hugging and kissing and holding,
Mhm.
physical love. And I couldn't find it anywhere else until I came to Spain. And it's such a beautiful country, and the food's also very good. And we were in Marbella, and because we have quite a few kids, we have to choose a place that's close to an airport. So we didn't choose Marbella because of a party lifestyle. No, it's very close to the airport. It has good hospitals, has great medical health, which is pretty awesome, you
Mhm.
know, in these times. And it's right by the sea. And I really, even though I'm from a landlocked country, I spent a lot of time in Cape Town. So it's like Zimbabwe and Cape Town combined without the wild animals, unfortunately, but it has everything. And now I'm no longer homesick. I finally found where I belong. I belong again. And that took 18 years.
Wow.
And yeah, it was painful. No doubt about it. It was painful because you're thrust into so you would go and be an expat somewhere, and there would be all these nationalities. There'd be Germans, there would be, but I'm 8 generations African already, so there would be Germans, and there would be um so many nationalities, and they would all stick together, and they would all stay within their cliques, which I
Mhm.
found even more interesting. The French would stick with the French, the Germans stick with the Germans, the Dutch stick with the Dutch. I was like, what's this? And that was like, wow. And then you miss the jokes, right? The humor
Yeah.
of your own people. And nobody really got me. So that was quite hard. I think that was the hardest part. That trying to bridge the humor and then trying to explain where I came from and have people think that I was making up stories. That was pretty tough. But now I am in a place that I'm no longer homesick, and I'm happy about it. Yeah.
Do you know if you did keep up with either childhood friends or family friends, if that was a experience that many Rhodesians had as they left the country, or left Zimbabwe later on and trying to find a place, to live where they wouldn't be homesick, if they experienced similar emotions and I guess had similar experiences to the ones you just described?
I think a lot of people, when they left, they went to South Africa, which was a time bomb to a large degree, and we'll see what happens there.
Mm.
I went there too to start with, and I was like, South Africa is not Zimbabwe. Very different, but people
Mhm,
confuse them all the time.
mhm.
Both are great, super great. I love South Africa. I think it's great, and my favorite comedian is Trevor Noah. So um, yeah. What was the question again?
Oh, I guess it was, I know, like, a lot of Rhodesian expats ended up in, say, New
Oh yeah.
Zealand or Australia, but do you know if the experience you described are similar ones to others had as they tried to find a new home after theirs been taken away? From the
I
people you
think
spoke to.
I think it's a huge problem.
Mhm,
I think that when I am on Facebook and I see the groups and I think that also, you need a certain amount of psychological help after you've been through a war as a soldier.
mhm.
Um, and they didn't get that. And I think on both sides, that was really, that's hard, 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 hard. I don't know if you've seen the film Reservoir Dogs.
I haven't.
Oh, is it Reservoir Dogs? No, it's another one. I forget it. It was about the Vietnam War with Christopher Walken and De Niro and all these guys, Meryl Streep. It's an excellent film, and I think these these men at a very young age went through a lot, and that never heals. And I can feel the pain in a lot of people in various groups that still have not moved on.
Mhm,
And I think journaling, writing is like the biggest healing tool ever for me. It worked. And I really try and encourage people to do so. You don't have to publish it. You have to, if you want to, sure. But I mean, no, there's people that really suffer about not being able to go home or that have been exiled, that are homesick and that have never ever gotten over it.
yeah,
It's sad.
sad. Was that part of what you were trying to accomplish with Nika, I Love You? Or, and then, what were your other goals with the book, or what were you trying to accomplish with it and publishing it?
I think that first of all, it was a love letter to Zimbabwe. And Nyika is a word that is used north, west, east, and south of Africa. People of the land, child of the wilderness. So it's kind of perfect for the title. And it's a thank you letter to Nyika for saving my life. And it's also a um, a record of my life so that my daughter can have a record of her mother's life. And I think that resonates with a lot of mothers my age and older and younger that have had to leave, um, or have chosen to leave. A lot of us that left, we were blamed for leaving, and a lot of people were angry with us for leaving. And I understand that too. But a lot of this book was also for those people that had children in Europe or in the Middle East or in Asia or so on. And they try to tell their kids about their lives, and their kids just didn't get it. And
Mhm.
so this book was for their children. So that's why the English is also very simple, so that a child of 12, a child of 10 can read this book. So they understand what their moms and dads and about the country they came from.
I think you accomplished it. It's a very good book. It's also one that the tone of it and the content makes it a little bit easier to pass around than, some of the others, um, to the uninitiated.
Yeah.
Some of the other memoirs. I guess related to that, I understand you have a new book coming out soon. Could you describe it, and its title, and, what it's about, what you aim to accomplish with it, all of that,
Okay.
for people who are
Um,
not interested?
Thank you. The next book is called The Clowns of Solitaire, and the book after that is called The Rat Pack Kid. And The Clowns of Solitaire is about forgiveness, um, and it's about I was nearly murdered. So it's about coming to terms. The clowns are the feelings that hold you back from taking a step forward and carrying on with your life. So I bought an army truck and I changed it into a home on wheels. And drove around Africa I did 12,000 kilometers.
Wow.
Yeah. And I had the most incredible experiences with rich in culture, just amazing. I took my dog. Her name was Sahara. She was a red setter. And when I was in Mozambique, I stopped at this compound, and I had the most amazing experience with the agogo, which is an African grandmother. And when I left the next day, she gifted me a chicken. So the chicken came with me on my trip. So I had a chicken, and I named her Madame Mao, and my dog Sahara, and we drove together. I had got such a fright when I was nearly killed that my voice had jumped out of my body like a red hot mare and bolted. And I went to find it again. And that's what that book is about. It's about finding your voice again after being in a severe accident.
And then what will the, third one be about?
Third one is a dedication to my mom and dad and a rat pack. Do you know what a rat pack is?
Nah.
We didn't have sweets growing up. So the army guys used to really camp on our lawn and outside our house, especially on
Mhm.
Guarani, the first farm.
Right.
And they had boxes, and in the boxes there were sweets, and we used to collect seed pods as currency, and we used to take them to them, and they were called lucky beans, and we used to say, "We have 5 lucky beans for 5 sweets." Like, we used to try, me and, Kudzai, Nika's son, and my
Mhm.
sisters and brothers, like, to get their jelly, to get their water biscuits, and to get their sweets because we didn't have any. The only
Mhm.
sweets we had was condensed milk. When you boiled it, it became caramel. That was our sweets, and my mom cooked cake and stuff, so yes, we had cake, but, actual sweets, so they had boiled sweets, and so the Rat Pack Kid is about these food boxes that the army carried around were called rat packs, and I grew up on those things.
Yeah.
That my no, it was they were crazy. Like, my dad used to come back from the war because my dad went to fight as well,
Mhm.
and, I used to put shoe polish on his face. I used to do his camouflage before he
Ah,
left,
wow.
and he'd make jokes, and then I'd stick stuff in his helmet, like shrubbery, and then he would say, "Bye, I'll be back with the rat packs," and then I'd always find a rat pack underneath my pillow before he left.
Wow. The condensed milk, I forgot to bring that up, but that makes for one of the, more entertaining stories in Nyika, I Love You, 'cause, your brothers I think it was your brothers, really exacerbated the situation.
Yeah.
If you wanna end with that story before we kind of, start to wrap up,
Okay. As you know, a lot of children thought they were the first ones to do online schooling, right? So they're wrong. We were already doing it with correspondence with School on the Air with the BBC, and
Hmm.
you'd get all your books post, and then you'd sit next to the radio, and they'd say this lesson. You take out your book for that lesson. And my mom was teaching us. She taught all of us children, and I was the last. And anyway, we were sitting outside because it was a nice day, and she was teaching us under the tree and not in the classroom. And we heard, "Bah!" And she was like, "We're under attack." So everybody like hit the floor, and we were sort of trying to have a tea party, and all the teacups went flying, and everybody was leopard crawling in there because we had dressed up that day in these like Victorian funny dresses from our yeah. Well, my grandmother used to bring a whole lot of stuff from the Salvation Army, boxes of stuff, and yeah. What had happened is Blessing had forgot to puncture the holes into the cans of but on top of that, it just by coincidence, my brother had found cans of hairspray or something and thrown these cans into the furnace at the back of the house. So both explosions had gone off at the same time, him not knowing about the condensed milk and Blessing not knowing about the cans going into the furnace that warmed our water at the back of the house. So yeah, that was one of the one of the experiences. But we had lots of fun. I mean, even after attacks, my dad would play the piano and we would all sing songs from The Sound of Music, actually.
Hmm, fun.
Really, like
Uh,
all the songs, we knew them off by heart.
I won't ask you to sing.
No,
The,
please don't.
yeah, yeah.
I can't.
The,
I
j
can't.
before we, hop off and end the show, is there anything I missed that you had wanted to talk about or wanted to cover?
No, I don't think so. No, no, no.
Right. Well,
No.
thank you very much for taking the time to come on. I really enjoyed this.
Okay.
Everyone who listened, I would say, I know whenever I have an author on, I say to get the book, but this is one where you should really get it. It'll be linked in the show notes, whether you're listening on Spotify or Substack or YouTube or whatever. And it'll just be there where you can click the link and order it. It's a lot of fun. I really enjoyed reading it. It only took me a sitting or two because I was actually very interested in it and really enjoyed just going through it and reading about it. And it's a very different tale of life in Rhodesia and then Zimbabwe than a lot of the memoirs that have been published. So I would really recommend reading it and really got a lot out of it. And Alice, thank you very much for taking the time to come on. I quite appreciate it. And everyone who listened, thank you for listening. See you again next time. Bye.